This is the launch of momentum within the effort itself. That was an excellent exposition of the trade union bill. I thought it was brilliant, to be frank. We went through all the different avenues in which they were attacking us. Let me just explain what's happened over the last 8 months, because it's been startling, to be frank. Absolutely startling what's happened. I certainly didn't expect to be standing here as the Shadow Chancellor. I didn't expect we'd have a socialist as the leader of the Labour Party, possibly in my lifetime. But we have. When we lost the election in May, many of us were despondent on that Friday morning. Some of you can remember it, just how bad it was. I was one of those ones who thought that we would most probably be the largest party, but I also thought we might even sneak a small majority. And so on that Friday, it was devastating, absolutely devastating. I quite liked Ed Miliband. I wanted him to stay on for a period until the party settled down. We had analysis of why we lost, and we moved on. But he resigned fairly swiftly after the election, the day after, and we were into a leadership election. And what happened is that the left organisations in the Labour Party came together. I bring them together on a group called the Left Platform. It was the left trade unions and left organisations. And there was a lot of pressure to run a candidate for the Labour leadership. And I opposed that. I said, there's no way we'd get on the ballot paper. Don't take any racing tips off me ever again. We met 3 times. On each occasion, Jeremy and I spoke to people and said, look, we don't think we'll get there. We needed 35 nominations. And I, at best, calculated we could get 22. Jeremy, being an optimist, calculated 23. So we were well short. Anyway, in the end, what happened was there was a lot of pressure, so I convened a meeting of the Socialist Campaign Group of MPs to talk about it. And we decided that we would run a candidate as best we could. And we went round the table in the House of Commons. Myself, I said, look, I've run twice, I couldn't go on the ballot paper. That's how popular I am in the Parliamentary Labour Party. Diane Abbott ran last time, some of you remember, and got a reasonable result, but she said, I've done my bit. Michael Meacher was there, God rest his soul, and a number of others, and we went round the table. And at the end of the table, I said, look, I can't do it. Diane said, I'm not going to do it again. At the end of the table was Jeremy. So we turned to Jeremy and said, right, your turn, mate. And he said, oh, go on then. Now, I don't know what you think, but that's the sort of leader I want. I want a leader that you have to force into doing it. Because in Parliament, I'm surrounded by over 600 MPs, most of whom have come to Parliament, with often the good intentions, but most of them in the back of their pocket is an envelope, and on the back of that envelope is written the day they'll be elected MP, the day they'll be a minister, and the day they'll be Prime Ministers. And what happens is ambition overrides principle, and often overrides judgment. And the good thing about Jeremy Corbyn is that there's no ambition there whatsoever in terms of personal career or anything like that, but the ambition is to achieve socialism in this country. So when he said he would run, I was overjoyed. I said, I'll chair the campaign committee. We had a week to get the nominations in, 35. So we put together a team to contact MPs, to talk to them about the nominations. We got people in constituencies lobbying, we got on the social media campaign, lots of young people involved. It was incredibly effective. We got to the final, well, the Sunday night, we were in the House of Commons, and we were finalising how many we'd got. And by then, we'd got about 28, 29. The close of nominations were at midday on the Monday, and by 11 o'clock we were about 30, half 11, we got to 33, we had to get 35. I'd done a deal with 5 MPs, this is what you have to do, I'm afraid. I did a deal with 5 MPs that if we got to 34, they'd nominate to get us into 35. And 4 of them turned up on the day, and I got them to sign the nomination papers, and they stood there, and 10 seconds before midday, we hadn't got the nominations, we only got 33, but 10 seconds before, and I did a bit of an appeal, a bit of emotional appeal on basic democracy, 2 of them cracked and nominated them, Andrew Smith from Oxford and Gordon Marsden from up in Blackpool, and we got through the bar of 35. And I'll be eternally grateful to both of them. And the reason they did it was not necessarily supporting Jeremy, it was actually to give us a democratic say on who should be the leader of the Labour Party next. So I'll be eternally grateful to them. We then had to go out and find Jeremy because he'd gone for a cup of tea, and I had to tell him he was the candidate. It came as somewhat of a shock to him as the candidate. We then put together a campaign team, and we started booking halls around the country to do a political tour, as well as the hustings. And I've been around a long while on the left and organised quite a bit. As I said, chaired a socialist campaign for a number of years. So the team, I said, look, book halls. And I thought, something like book a hall, usually no more than 100 seats. And make sure they're seats like this, because if we only get a crowd of 20, you can take the seats aside and it'll still look relatively crowded and respectable. And that's the traditional way the left organises, you know. We went for his first one. He did our TV hustings in Nuneaton, I thought performed really well. Then we did our first campaign meeting, and as I say, a hall booked for 100, 500 turned up. So the next one, I said to the campaign team, book the next one for 500. So we did a hall for 500, 1,000 turned up. And it just went on like that, all around the country. Every time we booked a hall, we had people queuing up outside in the street. He did 100 meetings like that. 100 meetings. I reckon we spoke to maybe between 50 and 80,000 people in those meetings. The best one, some of you may have seen the film, the best one in terms of depicting what was going on was in Camden, at the big Camden Bidra Centre, so that holds about 2,500. It was packed, and then the people absolutely filled the street. So we got the FBU to bring their fire engine down, and Jeremy spoke in the hall, and then spoke from the top of the fire engine. And there's a brilliant film of two young people breaking into the hall, not breaking out. It's a rare occasion you get young people breaking into a political meeting like that rather than rushing for the door. All around the country, what was happening was that people were despondent after we lost the election, but actually they then immediately picked themselves up and wanted to engage in political discussion, debate and analysis. And what they wanted, to be frank, was hope. They just wanted some hope for the future. And the people who turned up at those meetings, you have traditional Labour Party members, but also a huge number of people who left the Labour Party and were coming back again, but also a large number of young people. And it was absolutely effervescent, the excitement of that campaign. We got to the final day in terms of the results, and as you know, it was at QE2 in London. All our canvas returns, we had telephone canvassers all around the country, just volunteers, youngsters who'd been trained. They were coming back to me with polling results saying we were getting anything between 55 and 60% of the vote, and I didn't believe them. So I did some retraining and we started testing it again. And the night before our final one, we came out with about 60% of the vote. So when we turned up on the day at the QE2 hall, we met all the other candidates. Jeremy went up and I went into the green room to meet them. It was all very comradely friendly. And as you know, he got the announcement and we got 59.5% of the vote, which was a huge breakthrough in terms of what an achievement. But what was good about it is that we won a majority in every section, both in terms of Labour Party members, in terms of affiliated supporters, and in terms of the new supporters that had joined. And it's typical. Jeremy, as you know, went down and did a speech, he talked to people, then went and saw all the volunteers and thanked them. And the first act of the new Labour leader, I think, was incredibly significant. The first thing that Jeremy did is he joined the demonstration in Parliament Square to welcome refugees into this country. And I think that was a symbolic act of demonstrating what we're all about, which is about working with people, some of them the most vulnerable within our society, and some of them actually who in many ways needed our forms of solidarity to support them. Since then, as you know, what's happened is that Jeremy formed the shadow cabinet, left, right and centre. It was like a shadow cabinet of the old days, where you include everybody, you don't exclude any section of the party, because we're a broad church. We did have some people who refused to serve. It was a bit bizarre. We had a small number of people who were refusing to serve in positions that they hadn't been offered on the basis of policies they hadn't read. It was extraordinary. Nevertheless, what we tried to do is say, look, it's a broad church, we want everyone to participate, and everyone was offered a position and a role if they wanted it. And so what we've done is we've built up a shadow cabinet, and we've moved on now to form the administration. We've been there now 3.5 months. And to be frank, it's been tough. It's been tough. The media has come at us on a daily basis. And I don't want to disillusion any of you. There's some young people here, I don't want to disillusion you. But I have to say to you, you can't always believe what you read in the Daily Mail. I know it's a comes as a shock to some people. And what they've done is, I think Jeremy is just, what's impressed me is his stamina. He did 100 meetings around the country. What's impressed me as well is the courage and determination he's shown in standing up to these people. He doesn't take any personal slights. The most vicious part of it is the inventions, of course, but also the way in which they pursued all our families. It's been a disgrace, to be honest. And with Jeremy, they ran out of family members. I don't know whether you saw that story, but they went back and traced his hereditary background, and they got back 4 generations to one of his uncles who ran a workhouse in London. What a swine that Jeremy Corbyn is, allowing that to happen. You know? They've dug up for me girlfriends going back to the 1970s that I'd forgotten I'd ever gone out with. And one paper put an advert in the paper saying, do you know anything about John McDonnell, did you know him, whatever. And a woman wrote in, and that was lovely really, she wrote in, she said, I went to school with John McDonnell, at primary school, and he was at St Mary's Catholic School with me, and he used to whisper the maths answers to me so I didn't get caned by my sister Cambridgeshire. That was in all of this. Wait for it. Someone then tweeted, what a cheat he is. Jeremy's withstood all of that, and we've held the party together as best we can. We've doubled the membership of the Labour Party. We've doubled it. And people are joining in their numbers every day. Our aim is to have a Labour Party with 1 million members. I think we can do that. I think we can recruit and build people into it. There's lots of people who are not members but are still supporters who work alongside us and campaigners. We now have a new relationship with the trade union movement in which we're supporting trade unions in campaigning against the trade union bill, supporting trade unions working with the work. The other day I got a bit of stick for going on the picket line for the junior doctors, and to be frank, what we said about that is very straightforward. We went along to hear their views of what was happening, and also to put pressure on Jeremy Hunt to get back round the table to negotiate a reasonable settlement. To be frank, I was proud to be on that picket line with the junior doctors for the way that they've been abused in the media and attacked by Jeremy Hunt, and the distortions that they've had about the role that they play within our NHS. Because they're not just this isn't about wages or anything like that for them. This is about safety, and it's about the protection of the service that they actually provide so well to all of us. So there's a new atmosphere within the Labour Party. We're working right the way across the piece. In addition to the trade unions, there's large numbers of organisations that are campaigning on different issues. Whether it comes from DPAC, Disabled People Against the Cuts, who've been campaigning against the cuts in the welfare state and the tax on disabled people. Whether it's women's groups, whether it's people who are actually providing services for the elderly, and they're under pressure at the moment as a result of local council cuts. So that there's a new atmosphere in terms of solidarity where we're working with one another to protect one another and also to defend ourselves against the attacks by the Tories themselves. But there's also a new atmosphere about how we go about debating our policies and where we go from here. We're trying to ensure that we're a fully democratic party. So we're now at that stage where we're opening up the policy-making process to everybody. And what we want to do now is start discussing with everybody, those within the party and those outside it, the sort of issues that communities are confronting, the policies that we need for the future, and then we start campaigning for them, not in 2020 when the election comes, but now. And we come together in meeting halls like this to talk about those issues, talk about those policies, and then get out there knocking on people's doors, calling meetings in the street, campaigning for those policies. Because what came out of the campaign was interesting. We did meetings like this around the country. Jeremy said to me, come on, let's go on a tour around the country. I said, you better go on your own because it would look like the last of summer wine on tour if we went together, to be honest. So we toured around, but what happened was it became a discussion. The meetings became a discussion. People were turning up with their own personal experiences and saying what they thought the solution was. And to be frank, they mystify politics in this country. It always has to be complicated. Well, it doesn't. Just give you some examples. Young people turned up. And they said, look, we want to go into training or university. We go to university, we come out with a debt now, anything between £30,000 and £50,000. Well, the solution, I've always thought that education was a gift from one generation to another, not a commodity to be sold. So the solution to that is abolish tuition fees. It should never have been introduced in the first place.
Hear, hear.
When we founded the welfare state and under the Cambridgeshire government after the Second World War, we had a vision of education free for all the way through life, so that people could actually develop their talents and skills. And those are the talents and skills that we need for a vibrant economy. And that's one of the reasons why our economy trails, certainly in terms of productivity, behind Germany and elsewhere, because we failed to invest in the skills that we need. Other issues came up, housing. I don't know what it's like in your area, but I'll tell you what's happening in mine. I represent a working class constituency on the edge of London, Hayes, near Heathrow. I've lived there 40 years now. On housing, we've got the biggest housing crisis we've ever faced in maybe 4 generations, so since before the Second World War. Tonight, I'll have 200 families living in bed and breakfast because they haven't got a roof over their heads. I'll have people sleeping in sheds and garages, not individuals, but families. Sheds and garages. We now have in London, in my constituency in particular, shanties being developed. I went around during the election photographing them because people weren't believing what I was saying. It's a scandal. And why is that? We've reinvented the back-to-back. You know, they used to have back-to-backs in the old northern cities. We've reinvented it in my area now. We have families renting the front of a house and another family renting the back. The average rent in my area now is anything between £1,200 and £1,600 a month. And most of that money is going to private buy-to-let landlords who don't maintain their properties and are exploiting people with high rents and substandard conditions. Why has that happened? Well, it's obvious, isn't it? Someone just came up at one of the meetings, bleeding obvious. It's because we haven't built council houses for the last 30 years. So the solution to our housing crisis is to start building council houses again. We've also got London and the South East is hit now by high levels of rents. And this country, we used to have a fair rent system. We used to have fair rents, so rents were controlled. They'd be assessed and controlled. That happens right the way across Europe. Fair rents exist in capital cities right the way across Europe. So our argument now, and Sadiq Khan, our candidate in the mayoral elections in London, is putting forward ideas about new mechanisms in which we can control rents. We have 700,000 properties standing empty in this country at the moment, 300,000 of them empty for more than 6 months, so long term. I think it's a moral crime to have a property standing empty for that length of time whilst the family is homeless. So what we want to do is give powers to councils so that they can use those empty properties to put families in. And sometimes if that is about purchasing them, well, fair enough, let's do it. Because that's, at the moment, there's a cycle developing of young people who live in overcrowded conditions, often buy-to-let properties. They're in those properties for no more than 18 months to 2 years. They then get churned into another property, moving school, and to put money into the system. That's why we went through quantitative easing and we were printing money. But most of that money has gone into the pockets of the bankers that caused the crisis in the first place. And they are literally laughing all the way to the bank. And we're almost back to square one. What Osborne is doing, in the last few months he's deregulated, he's taking regulations off the bank again. The person who was appointed to head up the Financial Conduct Authority to represent the consumers hasn't had his contract renewed, and they're now putting forward a banking bill which undermines a lot of the regulations that were brought in after the crisis. So we're on the edge now of yet another potential economic crisis because we've gone through the same pattern as before. And again, people understand what's happening. And that's why at many of our meetings, what people have said is we've got to control credit. We've got to regulate the banks. But also, we've got to have a public stake in those banks. That's why we argue we should have a state bank for investment in our infrastructure in the long term. It's those policies that Jeremy advocated and became an elected leader of the Labour Party. It's those policies that with you now we're going to work up in detail, and they're the policies that we'll be campaigning on in the coming months and years. And there's a running theme through all of it. and it's about fairness. All we're about, to be honest, all we ask for is a fair society. And the way that we can gain that is making sure people have got rights, employment rights, legal rights, that we invest our resources patiently for the long term, that we redistribute resources. And it doesn't mean increasing people's taxes or anything like that. It just simply says for the corporations and the rich, pay your taxes. Just pay the taxes that you're meant to. So we can... Let me also say this as well. We've got the potential in this country, the skills, the resources, the potential for a prosperous future. But that future has to be sustainable. So one of the key elements of our campaigning will be to ensure that we recognise the threat of climate change. We recognise the need for investment, particularly in renewable energy that comes under democratic and public ownership and control as well. That will enable us to tackle that threat of climate change. And I think on that basis, there's a prospect then that we can have a Labour government. But this time round, it will be a Labour government that's based upon not a small number of MPs or a leader who's dictatorial telling us which way to vote. It will be based upon the social movement that we're building through the Labour Party at the moment. Now, part of that social movement is momentum. Lots of young people and campaigners at the end of Jeremy's campaign said, where do we go now? And we said to them, actually, you need to keep on campaigning, because this is just the first stage. We win the leadership election, and that's when the real struggle starts. The media will start coming at us. We'll need to start building up our resources and our programme, our policies, and our support. So that's why a number of people founded Momentum. It's a way of coordinating the campaign from here on in. You don't have to be a member of the Labour Party. We want people to be a member of the Labour Party, but you don't have to be. You can just be a supporter. But the idea behind Momentum is to bring people together, discuss the issues within their communities and nationally, talk about the solutions, feed them into the Labour Party, and then start campaigning around those issues. And that way, I think that will result also in electoral victories for Labour. We've got elections coming up in May, local government elections which are going to be incredibly tough. Last time we fought, we were 12 points ahead in the polls, so we're at an all-time high. So it's going to be incredibly tough. We've got Scotland, which is going to take us years to win back, to be frank. Wales, not so bad, but still a challenge from UKIP. And we've got mayor elections in London and elsewhere. These elections are going to be really hard for us, but it means we want to maximise our vote. And the way we maximise our vote is convincing people about our policies, but then getting them out to vote. So part of the work of Momentum will be helping us in those elections. I think for me, to be frank, this is the most exciting period in politics in my life.
Hey.
I never ever thought I'd live to see a socialist as the leader of the Labour Party. I never thought we'd have this process of democratic engagement ever again. And I never thought we'd see a new generation in particular, who everyone thought very political, actually on the march again. I think we all want to be part of it. But it is tough. If we're taking on the whole of the establishment, they're not going to sit back and do nothing. They're going to come at us. So what do we need? First of all, we need courage, to be frank. Sometimes you just need a bit of courage. You need a courage to actually stand up and say that's wrong and this is what should be happening. Sometimes you're on your own on that. You swim against the stream. But what's interesting, all around the country, on different areas of campaigning, people with courage are standing up and fighting back. The second thing is determination, absolute determination. They're not going to grind us down. They're not going to divide us. They're not going to split us up. They're not going to undermine our commitment. They're not going to undermine the momentum that we now have. So yes, determination. But above all else, there's one other thing we need. And we discovered it 2 centuries ago in the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution, in the small workshops and in the fields, the agricultural workers in the fields. And it was basically together, united, we're strong, divided, we're weak. We put it on our banners, an injury to one is an injury to all. Workers united will never be defeated. The secret was solidarity. If we have solidarity, nothing can withstand our campaign and the force that we put together. Solidarity.